Okay, well, morning everybody. It's just ticked round to 11:01, so I think if that's okay, we'll make a start, and hopefully some more people will be joining. So I'm delighted to welcome everybody to what's the first Climate Cafe event for Zero Carbon Cumbria Partnership. Just to mention at the outset that we are recording today's event just for the benefit of those unable to attend, so this will be available more widely afterwards. I'm Nigel Jenkins. I'm part of the Zero Carbon Cumbria team here at Cumbria Action for Sustainability. And the climate cafes are an idea which was originally born out of Scotland and have since helped inspire a movement of similar cafes which are taking place both in person and virtual. They generally work to a similar kind of principle. So they're free, open, welcome to all, inclusive, informal, and a space to talk, listen, share, and inspire action. And without any judgment or party politics or requiring particular expertise, although we're very pleased to have expertise on the panel today, of course. So on that note, very pleased to welcome our two panelists. We have Paul Young here, who's the lead climate scientist at JBA Risk Management and an honorary researcher at Lancaster Environment Centre at Lancaster University. And he previously led a climate and atmospheric science research group at Lancaster University. So delighted to have your expertise, Paul. And similarly, Karen Mitchell, who's the Chief Executive of Cumbria Action for Sustainability and also the co-chair of Zero Carbon Cumbria Partnership, and is instrumental in leading on Cumbria's responses to the climate crisis. We'll hear from both our panelists, and there'll be an opportunity to take some questions from the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your Zoom window, hopefully. So if you've got a particular question, please do route it through the question and answer feature. You're also very welcome to use the chat function for introductions and comments. So please feel free to use that and interact with other people on the call. This is the first of these. It's a little bit experimental, so bear with us, but hopefully it will all go well, and it will be a way of perhaps building on this for future engagement. And we recognise that obviously working towards net zero is going to require a very broad range of engagement through numerous different channels, because it's ultimately a communication and a people challenge. So starting on the climate science, then I know as a lay person, the media is awash with climate headlines, and I read things like the Met Office saying that 2022, for the first time on record, the temperatures in the UK exceeded 40 degrees. We've had the top 10 UK's hottest years all since 2002. We've had this year extreme and erratic weather events such as in Europe and North America, on Maui and Australia. We've had the warmest September on record apparently last month. And I read in the media that the data is gobsmacking for climate scientists. So I don't know, Paul, whether you are truly gobsmacked, but we'll find out in a moment, I guess. Also, we have COP28 starting in Dubai next month. We'll again consider the Paris Agreement goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And then also, quite rightly, we have young people who are very vocal in reminding us all to listen to the climate science, which is what we're hoping to do today. So, Paul, I'll hand over to you and ask about your work, which focuses on the latest environmental science and how it can best be applied and translated for end users. So I'm hoping you can help make sense of this, please, in terms of where we are now with global climate science, and equally what this means perhaps for Northwest England and for Cumbria. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Nigel. Very happy to be here. So over the next 3 hours, I'm going to give you a lecture. Not really. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a perspective from climate change, climate science. So as Nigel said, my old job was at Lancaster University. I used to lecture on this kind of thing, and sort of contributed to various reports and things. So I've been working with the data, working with the computer simulations for a long time. And now in my new job, which is there, at JBA Risk Management, we're based out of Skipton. I'm now basically doing very, very similar things, but talking to industry and development banks around the world, just to kind of help them understand climate change and climate science. So as I was saying, we were doing in our practice. I hope this still works. I'm sort of cheating by showing slides and not showing slides. This, I think, this picture is probably something you would have seen before if you've engaged with anything on social media or seen in maybe even in the press. So this is just to give you a long-term perspective of like just how extraordinary we are today. So I'll just make sure I'm going to point in the right way. Am I pointing? No, I think that would be that's the warm bit. Is that right? So,
Yeah.
oh, it's goodness, it's good. It's mirrored. So, we are here in 2021, and what this is showing is like how the temperatures are different compared to what they were compared to the Victorian period. So, you can kind of think of this from the Industrial Revolution, and so you can see it's been it was a lot colder back then, and a lot warmer today, and we're about a degree warmer than we were in Victorian times. And it's no surprise to you, as I'm sure you know, the reason for why we are that is because we've emitted so many greenhouse gases in that time. And just to give you, I can give you one more, even longer perspective. So this shows a very the same kind of idea. So how temperatures have changed, but this time over 12,000 years. So you can see on one side we're coming out. So 12,000 years ago we were coming out of an ice age. Then we were moving into something. I promise I won't get too technical, but for those of you who want to know, this is called the Holocene climate optimum. And then entering a cooler period about maybe the last 2,000 years with various blips. But here we are again, way outside of the range that we've been in the last 12,000 years. And in fact, we think the last decade has certainly been the warmest in 120,000 years, possibly even longer than that. Now, the difference is here, lots of people I talk to people who are maybe skeptical about this, and they can say, well, the climate's always changed, hasn't it, Paul? I can say, well, yeah, absolutely. And this is exactly evidence of that. But the reason that this changed is things that we know. So we know that climate varies naturally. It goes in and out of ice ages, for instance, and that's to do with the Earth being closer or further away from the sun, or just changing slightly in the way that it orbits. But here, this is where we've got our contribution from greenhouse gases. So I'll come back. I'll just show this one again. This gives us a bit of a more of a recent perspective. So you can think, so 1 degree warmer doesn't sound that much, but this is averaged over the whole world. And what this represents is a huge amount of energy that there is now in the Earth system, in the climate system, that wasn't there before, which is measurably changing the weather that we're seeing. So I like to think of it like that it loads the dice. So it makes dice unfair. So if you think of weather as being faces on a dice, and maybe back here we were rolling, and we would roll a 1, a 2, 3, or 4, or 5, or a 6. Here, now that we're warming, we're rolling more 5s and more 6s, and actually maybe we're even rolling 7s. Numbers that we couldn't even roll before. We're starting to be able to roll here. So we, not only are we rolling more of the higher numbers, we're rolling numbers that couldn't even be rolled before. So if you think about that in a northwest perspective, I think two key things that are affected here. So I'm sure many of you remember Storm Desmond, 2015. I was living in Lancaster at the time, so that massively impacted Cumbria, massively impacted Lancaster as well. A huge amount of rainfall that fell. And the reason that climate change can impact things like that is that the warmer the atmosphere is, the more water it can hold, and therefore on average you expect rainfall there to be just to be more rain coming out. And there are various people who've done analyses of that, looking at Storm Desmond, and they'd say that rainfall was essentially increased by 40%. So nearly half of that has come because of climate change. And I'm sure you all have your own stories from thinking about Desmond, but certainly in Lancaster, where I was living, we had a power cut. We had for a week, and it just really told stories about how unresilient we were. So the university where I was working at the time was sending emails out to tell you not to come into work, yet no one could get emails because the internet was down. There's no mobile phone reception because the mast was down, and so that was a way, I can go through the climate science of why Desmond was caused and why it was as it was. but the impacts that had on certainly the community in Lancaster, and I know communities in Cumbria, it really sort of told stories about resilience and impacts and how things have to change. I'll just say one more as well. So Nigel mentioned in 2022, the UK absolutely smashed its previous temperature record. So we topped 40 degrees. I believe it was 40.2 degrees was the highest temperature. Previously, before that, the highest temperature was 38.8 degrees in Cambridge in 2016. I might have got the year slightly wrong. Normally, temperature records are broken by fractions of a degree. That was broken by 1.5 degrees, which is extraordinary in of itself. The other thing is to think that in a 40-degree day in this kind of climate, a pre-industrial climate, as you want to call it, like so the Victorian times, virtually impossible. It's like it just couldn't happen. And some other analysis that have been done that could say even if we had the exact same weather conditions, so the air that the reason that it was so hot is because we had air blowing up from the south. But if that had happened back here, that heat wave would have been 4 or maybe 5 degrees colder than we saw it. But as it happened, we were happening here in a world that's 1 degree warmer. It's still a rare event. It's maybe 1 in 100-year event. But if we carry on going the way we're going, maybe that's something we can talk about. Happy to talk about that. We could be thinking that a 40-degree heat wave could be maybe more than once a decade. There's been some analysis from the Met Office that has looked into that. And again, as you know, what the impacts were from that. It's seriously damaging to health, huge risks. And there's this awful term, excess deaths. People of the Office of National Statistics have looked into that, and I believe the numbers there were a spike of about 700 deaths associated with that heat wave. And over the whole year of 2022, which was a very warm year, over 4,000 deaths associated with heat. So the climate is changing. We see it. We see it locally, and it matters, and it really does flag our lack of resilience to these things. Nigel, I'm happy to leave it there, and we'll take questions a bit later. But hopefully that just gives a bit of a framing.
Oh yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you, Paul. It's obviously such a massive subject, and you've managed to capture and summarise that very succinctly. So thank you very much, and particularly struck by some of the societal points that you made around resilience and necessarily to some degree of adaptation to the real effects that Cumbria and the northwest of England is already seeing around the climate crisis. So in the light of that global picture and the relevance even to our region, I'm going to ask Karen about what Cumbria's been doing in response to the climate crisis. How have we been working on this over recent times? So Karen, would you like to introduce more about your role and your work in this field and responding to that challenge?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Karen. I'm Chief Exec of Cumbria Action for Sustainability, and I also co-chair the Zero Carbon Cumbria Partnership. I think that big question, how is Cumbria responding to the climate crisis? I would say in many ways and at all levels, there's the response to the impact of extreme weather on many of our isolated communities that might be already struggling to access services. So I think we've seen a big increase in the resilience of communities to actually deal with the impacts of the climate crisis. So lots of flood resilience groups, upskilling and just developing really great, strong community links there. We've seen the rebuilding of footpaths and bridges after Storm Desmond that are built and designed to be flood resilient. We're seeing now fire services in Cumbria are training in how to deal with wildfires, because that is going to be something that we see more of in the county. So I think we are definitely better organised to respond to the impacts of the climate crisis. But of course, the only way to really tackle it is to stop the climate changing further. So that's where decarbonisation comes in, and that's why it's so important that CAFS, our organisation, and also the partnership, the wider Zero Carbon Cumbria partnership, that we're helping to develop and inspire individuals, communities, organisations to make that transition from high carbon to low carbon living and working. And over the past couple of years, we've seen lots more activity happening in that space. So we've got heaps of fantastic voluntary local sustainability groups that are supporting their communities to do that support and inspiration to make those shifts in behaviour and lifestyles. So we support those sustainability groups, and it's great to see that there's a growing number of those, because those groups are so embedded in their communities. They can really help people make those first, perhaps tentative steps to changing just a few things about the way they go about their lives. It might be, jumping on a bike a day a week instead of driving to work. It might be just learning a bit more about what the neighbours have done to improve the energy efficiency of their home and being inspired to pick up some of those changes themselves. So there's lots going on at a real local community level, really driven bottom up. We've also got the local authorities. So we've got the new unitary authorities of Cumberland and Westbury and Furness, and they have both recognised that climate change is one of the greatest challenges of all time. And they are increasingly integrating climate into their policies. And we have opportunities to influence that as they're developing new plans and policies as the new unitary authorities that they are. I think we're also seeing lots of businesses that are really picking this up as well, because it's in their interests to reduce their waste of energy, excuse me, to reduce their own carbon footprint. So what they're often doing is starting off with an audit of their business, finding out where their emissions come from, whether it's on their site or whether it's in their supply chain, and then looking at what they can do to improve efficiencies. And through those efficiencies, they can actually make financial savings, which can benefit the business in the longer term. We've also got the Zero Carbon Cumbria Partnership, which I've mentioned, which is a group of around 80 organisations that all recognise the criticality of dealing with climate change and reducing Cumbria's carbon emissions. And these are organisations that are very diverse. So we've got representatives from the public sector, the private sector, and the third sector coming together to really understand the county's carbon emissions, our responsibilities in terms of what we have control over of those emissions. And we're starting to really look in detail at how we make that transition, all the things that need to happen to take all our key sources of emissions to a point of net zero carbon by 2037, which is an ambitious challenge, but it's one that the collective group really understand and are doing their best to deal with.
Great, thanks very much, Karen. Just building on that, I guess sometimes a counter argument put out is, well, the climate crisis is a global problem. It's an overwhelming global problem. It's difficult to know where to start. Sometimes other parts of the world, other countries are blamed for principal emissions. So why is it still imperative that we act here positively in Cumbria? And what kind of opportunities might arise out of action in response to the challenge?
We do often get that sort of pushback that, climate, but I would say, well, climate change doesn't respect country borders. It's a globally unifying issue. It can't be fixed unless we all do our bit. I have often had people say, well, I'll do my bit, but it's only a little bit. How does that have any impact globally? And I would say that all the decisions that we make are effectively monitored. Really, we're sort of walking around as units of data. So every decision that you make when you're choosing to buy something or when you're Google searching for something, all of that data is, whether you like it or not, is being sort of monitored and analysed and picked over by often global interests, and it sets a direction. So investors will look at the consumption habits and will look at things like data on Google searches. And if they see that interest and demand and momentum towards low carbon options, then they will follow that and respond to that demand. So I think that's one of the answers I would give when people say, oh, well, you know, is there any real point in me doing my little bit? People often say, oh, what about China building more power stations? And to that, I would say, well, who's buying the goods that China produces? You know, if you were to look at the goods in your house and your home, how many of those are made in China? You'll find a huge quantity of goods that we consume here is made in China, and we need to take responsibility for that. So it's not China's carbon footprint, it's our carbon footprint, because we're creating the demand. In terms of sort of opportunities, for Cumbria, we know where the big emission sources are. We've got big chunks of emissions from buildings. We've got higher than national average emissions from our buildings, because we've got often quite a lot of poor housing stock. We've got a lot of people in fuel poverty in Cumbria. We've got those damp, drafty, hard to heat stone buildings. So there's a great opportunity there to stop that waste of heat through retrofitting properties, making them more energy efficient. Challenges are around knowledge and enabling people to feel confident about the kinds of changes that they're thinking of making to their property. So helping people to understand the options for, say, heat pumps instead of your gas-fired boiler. We need to do a lot around transport as another big source of emissions. Again, we've got higher than national average ownership of private cars because we have a lack of public transport. So there's a big job of work to do there in terms of getting the infrastructure right to give people safe alternatives for active travel on bikes or on foot, and also to really ramp up the public transport options. We've got emissions coming from businesses. We've got a lot of small businesses, micro businesses, who could be saving themselves money as well as energy. They need support because they may not have the capacity or the skills to really understand the kinds of things that they could be doing to change their business to make it more low carbon. I could go on, but I'm going to stop there because I'm conscious there may well be questions coming from people.
Yeah, well, thanks, Karen. That's a really strong case for local action, so appreciate that. And just to finish on that point, Paul, presumably there's an imperative also for the UK to be seen to be acting on this and to have a strong position as a leader in the global context. So even if the UK's emissions are 1 or 2% of the global position, if we don't act here, then how on earth can we work with partners elsewhere to try and tackle this?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, I mean, and Karen has really put that beautifully about, you know, why we need to care. I think that there was some people may have heard there was Hannah Ritchie, who runs Our World in Data. She's I think that's one of the chief data scientists there, who was on More or Less, which shows how old I am listening, as opposed to Radio 4. It was a great program, and I think her way of framing it, she talked about there being sort of thirds. You know, so there was third of emissions coming from the US, a third of emissions coming from China, and a third coming from elsewhere. So, you know, if someone in this third is like, well, you know, it's not really worth it, then that suddenly that could be that entire third of emissions suddenly doesn't get dealt with. And I think I really like that as an argument. I mean, it really is in addition to everything that's Karen said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's a really key point. So on that note, I'm going to ask Rebecca, would you like to field the questions? We've got a couple of questions coming so far. We'll try and answer these fairly succinctly. Would you take us through those, please?
Yeah, hi. We've got one just talking about tourism and train travel in particular, how train travel from Cumbria to Europe isn't as easy as it could be, including the Channel Tunnel operating on separate ticket systems and the comment we need feasible solutions. But I guess that's a difficult one for our panelists to think about, because that comes across what Cumbria can actually influence. Karen, do you want to talk about how much transport we can actually influence?
Yeah, it is a difficult one, particularly with train travel, because we've got, you know, such limitations on options for travelling by train in Cumbria. In terms of sort of visitors to Cumbria as tourists, you know, something that could be done is to encourage them to stay for longer, so that then reduces the proportion of their carbon footprint spent getting here. Obviously, with the cost of air travel is ridiculous because it's not taking into account the full cost to the environment of that form of travel. That's something that is difficult for Cumbria to influence. I think with ticketing actually on trains, there are some really good train sites now where you can get some brilliant kind of deals which can take you all the way from Cumbria through to wherever you want to go in Europe. So it's worth kind of doing your research there. But yeah, it is something that is definitely a challenge, particularly just getting around Cumbria on the train at the moment. My colleagues have huge difficulties with confidence around train travel. So let's see, Paul's got an answer too.
Yes, sorry, I just think I think I agree with everything you said about like certainly local difficulties and frustrations. I really wish that it was possible for me to commute to my office in Skipton by train. There is a train line from Morecambe to Leeds that I could use, but it's just, yeah, the provision is not good enough. But I will say that businesses here, so you can, if you've got the power to make structural changes with how if you have employees that need to go for meetings overseas, this is one way to sort of have them travel in a low carbon way, travel by train, and maybe it sets behavior changes that they might take more broadly into their personal lives. I had a meeting in Geneva last summer, which makes you sound terribly glamorous. Sorry, it's not meant to be doing that, but it is absolutely possible, far more relaxing than going by plane. So I think sometimes it's just making those kind of structural shifts, maybe incentivizing the changes. If you're working for an organization, can you change your travel policy? Can you make sure you account for the fact it takes extra time and make extra provision for that? So yeah, I think the structural changes can help.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, definite case for that. And I know the sector group for the Zero Carbon Cumbria Partnership is trying to look at holistic responses. So there's perhaps the stuff that's often in the news agenda around switching to electric vehicles, but then there's all sorts of other things, whether it's working from home, technological changes, e-ticketing, transport hubs, and so on. There's a whole range of ways of tackling this. We'll just come on to the second question, Rebecca, please. I think it's one for Paul.
Yeah, Paul, this is just, could you please say something about some of the tipping points that could make it even more challenging to tackle the climate crisis should temperatures rise by more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial averages? That's a big question, that.
Yeah, you've got 6 seconds to do that one, Paul.
This is where it does get scary. And so I caught sight of this question, and some of you may notice that I did grab this image, which I'm sorry, maybe looks very, very complicated, but this shows these locations of tipping points. So this is in brief to say what a tipping point is. So as the climate warms, for some places we might send things into a completely different state. So that which could lead to, like, instead of the climate change doing this, following greenhouse gases, we might suddenly get something that looks a bit like that, but especially in certain locations. So these are something they're called tipping elements, but it's a bit technical. But it's essentially, you can think of them as things in the world which if climate changes by a certain amount could become unstable. So some examples here. So the Amazon rainforest. So that if climate reaches a certain point, could die back, which is awful for many reasons. Certainly from a climate science point of view, there's so much carbon that's locked up in the trees there. So that's reduced the ability of the land surface to absorb our carbon dioxide if the Amazon rainforest goes. But there are other things that might even flip at a lower temperature. So this comes from a recent paper, or recent-ish paper, about 2 years ago. The Amazon probably wouldn't go into a tipping point until we get maybe over like 3 degrees warmer. So remember, we're 1 degree warmer now. But things like ice sheets, so the West Antarctica ice sheets, the Greenland ice sheets, is something that could tip a bit earlier. So that's got huge implications for sea level rise. So sea level rise is sadly one of those things that's locked in, hugely important for coastal communities. Cumbria, so around the coast here, around in Morecambe Bay too. So if you're getting ice sheets becoming unstable, sending sea level rise much faster than it would be, is there time to adapt? Can we build coastal defenses? Another one that's maybe is also worth mentioning is coral reefs. So we don't have any coral reefs, tropical coral reefs anyway, around where we are, but that is a hugely diverse and important ecosystem, not just for tourism, but for the amount of species that it supports, and fisheries and other activity that gets supported through those, and they become very very unstable at 1.5 degrees. By 2 degrees warmer, we could even have lost 95% of them. So this is the kind of thing that sort of keeps, I think, climate scientists awake at night. People who are working on this is like, this is the unknown. This is sending things into this new state, which is, quite frankly, is quite scary.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, certainly alarming, and certainly well done for having a pre-prepared graphic to illustrate it. We're just about to finish. I don't know, in 30 seconds, Rebecca, could you just give us a couple of recent topical news stories?
I sure can.
Response?
Yeah. I've got a couple of good news stories, actually. I've got the world's,
Brilliant.
I don't know if anybody saw the world's largest offshore wind farm started supplying electricity to the grid yesterday. So Dogger Bank Wind Farm in the North Sea. It's not completely finished, but when it is finished, it will produce enough electricity for approximately 6 million homes each year. And the site, which is 130 kilometres off the coast of Yorkshire, has turbines with long blades, 107-metre long blades, which I thought was absolutely amazing. And in news a bit closer to home, we've got local groups that are continuing to reap the benefits of taking climate action, which has co-benefits. So we've got a group in Barrow, Ortus, Cumbria, who have recently completed their first plant prepare and eat gardening project, which encourages their young people to take control of the food they eat whilst having important conversations about where their food comes from. And that story, along with quite a few other local projects which have got co-benefits, can all be found on the Zero Carbon Cumbria website.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm sure you put the link in the chat, maybe to the website. But I'm conscious we've overrun slightly. My apologies for that. But huge thanks again to Paul and Karen in particular for all of your knowledge and expertise that you brought today. And thank you to the audience. We're really conscious that achieving net zero is not just an emission reduction exercise, but it's ultimately about people. It's about societal readiness, and economic models, fair and just transition. So really important to have a broad engagement and conversation around climate as we move forward on responses. And we are hoping to run further climate cafe events for Zero Carbon Cumbria partnership in the future. But again, many thanks all, and we'll finish there. Thank you.